Right now, as you're listening to this, there is a voice inside your head. It's been there your entire life. It speaks in your tone, uses your memories, wears your identity, so you never question it. But here is something most people will never realize. That voice is not trying to free you. It is trying to control you. Silently, slowly, without you noticing. It tells you what to fear, what to regret, what to overthink, what to hold on to, and you obey it, as if it were truth. But look closely at your life. How many times have you suffered? Not because of what happened, but because of what you thought about what happened. How many nights have been ruined by thoughts that were never real? How many moments of peace were destroyed by a voice you never chose? This is the hidden trap. The mind doesn't need chains to control you. It only needs your belief. And once you believe it, you become it. But today, something changes. Today, you stop being inside your mind and you begin to see it. Because the moment you see it clearly is the moment it begins to lose its power. And what you're about to realize may completely change the way you experience your life. Forever. The voice you never question. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, before you even move, before you fully wake up, something has already begun shaping your entire day. And it does not come from the world outside. It comes from within you, quietly, automatically, without permission and without awareness. A thought appears. Not because you chose it, not because you invited it, but because your mind produces it, just like it always has. And almost instantly, without hesitation, another thought follows, and then another, forming a chain so seamless, so familiar, that you never stop to question where it started or why it continues. You begin thinking about what lies ahead, about what needs to be done, about what might go wrong, about what has already happened, and before your feet even touch the ground, your inner state has already been decided, not by reality, but by interpretation, not by truth, but by thought. This is where the illusion begins. Because the mind does not simply present thoughts as passing events, it presents them as reality. It wraps them in emotion, gives them weight, gives them urgency, and, most importantly, it makes them feel personal, as if they belong to you, as if they are you. So when a thought quietly arises saying that something is wrong, that something is missing, that something needs to be fixed, you do not observe it as a thought. You experience it as a fact, and in that moment, without realizing it, you step into it, you become it, and your entire perception of life begins to shift around something that was never solid to begin with. You walk through your day not just responding to life, but reacting to a constant stream of mental activity that never pauses, never rests, never asks for your permission, and yet controls how you feel, how you respond, and how you see everything around you. A simple situation becomes heavy because the mind adds meaning to it. A neutral moment becomes uncomfortable because the mind fills it with unnecessary noise, and something that could have passed quietly becomes something you carry for hours, sometimes days, sometimes even years, all because a thought was believed without awareness. And this is what makes it so difficult to see. The mind is not loud in the way you expect. It does not announce its control. It does not demand attention directly. Instead, it blends into your identity so completely that you mistake its voice for your own. And because of that, you never step back. You never observe it. You never question it. You assume that because a thought feels real, it must be true. You assume that because it comes from within you, it must belong to you. But what if that is where everything has been misunderstood? What if the very thing you trust the most is the very thing shaping your suffering? Because if you look closely, really closely, you begin to notice a pattern. Thoughts come and go without your control. Emotions rise and fall based on those thoughts. and your entire experience of life shifts accordingly, even when nothing in your external world has changed. This means something profound. It means that your life is not being shaped only by what happens to you, but by how your mind interprets what happens, and more dangerously, by how quickly you believe those interpretations without ever questioning them. This is how a single moment becomes a long-lasting burden. This is how a passing thought becomes a permanent belief. This is how the mind, without force, without effort, slowly begins to take control. And the most dangerous part is not that this is happening. The most dangerous part is that you don't notice it, because it feels normal. It feels like life. It feels like you. And that is why it continues, unseen, unchallenged, unquestioned, until one day you begin to observe it. And in that moment, for the first time, something shifts, not outside you, not in your circumstances, but within your awareness, where you begin to realize that what you have been following all along may not be you at all. The illusion of control. As you move through your day, interacting with people, making decisions, reacting to situations, there is a quiet assumption running in the background of your experience, an assumption so deeply embedded that you rarely, if ever, question it. And that assumption is this: that you are in control of your mind, that your thoughts belong to you, that they are guiding you in the right direction, and that without them, you would somehow lose your ability to function, to decide, to live. But if you slow down, even for a moment, and begin to observe carefully, honestly, without trying to change anything, something unusual begins to reveal itself, something subtle yet undeniable, something that has always been there but has never been seen clearly. You begin to notice that thoughts do not ask for your permission before they appear. They do not wait for your approval. They do not check whether they are helpful or harmful. They simply arise, one after another, forming a continuous stream that seems to operate on its own, independent of your intention, independent of your will. A memory surfaces from nowhere. A worry forms without invitation. A judgment appears instantly, without effort. And before you can even question it, your body responds, your emotions shift, your entire inner state changes, not because reality changed, but because a thought appeared and you followed it. If you were truly in control of your mind, you would be able to decide your next thought. You would be able to stop thinking when you choose. You would be able to silence the noise whenever you want peace. But this is not what happens, is it? Instead, the mind continues endlessly, repeating patterns, revisiting the past, projecting into the future, creating scenarios, building stories, and most of the time, these stories are not even accurate, yet they feel real enough to influence how you experience your life. This is the illusion of control. You feel like you are thinking, but in truth, thinking is happening to you. And because it feels so familiar, because it has been happening your entire life, you never step back to question whether you are the one creating these thoughts or simply the one witnessing them. The mind, in its nature, is not designed to be still. It is designed to move, to analyze, to compare, to predict. And this movement, when left unobserved, becomes constant, automatic, and overwhelming. It pulls you into the past, not to learn, but to relive, to replay moments that no longer exist, to reopen emotions that have already passed. And as you revisit these memories again and again, the mind convinces you that they are still relevant, still important, still worth your attention, even when they serve no purpose except to keep you stuck. At the same time, it pushes you into the future, creating possibilities that have not happened, problems that may never occur, fears that have no foundation except imagination, and yet your body reacts as if they are real. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your peace disappears, all because of something that does not exist outside your mind. And between these two directions, the past that is gone and the future that is not here, something essential is lost. The present moment, the only place where life is actually happening, the only place where peace is possible, the only place where you are free. But the mind does not rest in the present, because in the present there is nothing to fix, nothing to analyze, nothing to control. And for the mind, that feels like emptiness, like silence, like something is missing. So it keeps moving. It keeps generating thoughts. It keeps pulling you away. And because you are not aware of this movement, because you are inside it, not observing it, you go along with it. You follow every thought as if it were necessary, as if it were guiding you somewhere meaningful, when in reality, it is simply repeating patterns it has learned over time. This is why the same worries return again and again. This is why the same fears resurface, even after they have proven to be unnecessary. This is why the same emotional reactions repeat, even when you promise yourself they won't. Because the mind is not learning in the way you think it is. It is conditioning itself through repetition. And every time you believe a thought without awareness, every time you react automatically, every time you engage without observing, you strengthen that pattern, you reinforce that pathway, you make it more likely to happen again, until eventually it no longer feels like a pattern. It feels like who you are. And this is where the illusion becomes complete, because now it is not just thoughts that are controlling you, it is identity. You begin to say, "This is just how I am. This is just how I think. This is just who I've always been," without realizing that what you are describing is not your true nature, but the accumulation of repeated thoughts, repeated reactions, repeated patterns that were never questioned. And the mind, once it reaches this point, becomes even more powerful, because now it does not just influence you, it defines you. And when something defines you, you stop resisting it. You stop observing it. You accept it. And in that acceptance, without awareness, you give it complete control. But the truth is, control was never really yours to begin with. The mind was always moving. The thoughts were always appearing. The patterns were always forming. The only difference now is that you are beginning to see it. And the moment you truly see that you are not in control of your thoughts is the moment you begin to realize something even more important, that you don't need to be. Because freedom does not come from controlling the mind. It comes from no longer being controlled by it. How your mind creates suffering. At some point in your life, without anyone clearly explaining it to you, you began to believe that suffering comes from what happens outside of you, from the way people treat you, from the situations you face, from the things that don't go as planned. And because of this belief, you spend your energy trying to control the external world, trying to fix people, trying to avoid discomfort, trying to arrange your life in a way that finally brings you peace. But no matter how much you adjust, no matter how carefully you try to control your environment, something always feels unsettled, something always returns, a quiet discomfort, a subtle tension, a lingering sense that something is not right, even when everything appears to be in place. This is the point where most people become confused, because logically, everything should feel fine. Nothing is obviously wrong, nothing is immediately threatening, and yet, internally, there is movement, there is noise, there is pressure building without a clear cause. What is happening here is not life creating suffering, it is the mind reacting to life. And more specifically, it is the mind resisting what is. The mind has a way of comparing reality to an internal image, a set of expectations, ideas of how things should be, how people should behave, how you should be treated, how life should unfold. And when reality does not match this image, even in small ways, the mind begins to create friction. This friction is subtle at first, almost invisible, but it grows quickly, because the mind does not stop at observation. It moves immediately into judgment, into interpretation, into storytelling. A simple moment becomes layered with meaning. Someone doesn't respond the way you expected, and instantly the mind begins constructing possibilities. Maybe they don't care. Maybe you did something wrong. Maybe something is changing. And within seconds, what was once a neutral interaction becomes a source of discomfort. Not because of what actually happened, but because of what your mind added to it. And this process repeats constantly in conversations, in silence, in memories, in imagined futures. The mind is always adding, always interpreting, always turning simple reality into something heavier than it needs to be. It is important to see this clearly, because suffering is rarely created by the raw event itself. It is created by the layers of thought that follow the event, the interpretations, the assumptions, the conclusions that the mind draws without certainty, and yet presents as truth. This is why two people can experience the same situation and feel completely different about it, because it is not the situation that determines the experience, it is the mind interpreting the situation. And when this interpretation goes unnoticed, when it is accepted without awareness, it begins to shape your emotional reality in powerful ways. You begin to feel hurt where there was no intention to hurt you. You begin to feel rejected where there was no rejection. You begin to feel anxious about things that have not happened. And slowly, almost invisibly, your inner world becomes filled with tension, not because life is constantly difficult, but because the mind is constantly active. This activity does not rest. Even in moments where nothing is happening, where you are alone, where there is silence, the mind continues, replaying past conversations, imagining future scenarios, creating problems that do not exist in the present moment. And each time you engage with these thoughts, each time you follow them, each time you believe them, they leave a mark, a subtle imprint that stays with you. This is how suffering accumulates, not in dramatic events, but in small, repeated patterns of thinking that go unnoticed, patterns that slowly shape how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see life. And over time, these patterns become so familiar that they no longer feel like patterns. They feel like reality. You begin to identify with them. You begin to say, "This is just how life is. This is just how people are. This is just how I am," without realizing that what you are experiencing is not life in its pure form, but life filtered through a mind that has been conditioned to interpret everything in a certain way. This conditioning is powerful because it operates automatically. You don't wake up and decide to overthink. You don't choose to feel anxious about something small. You don't consciously create tension. It happens on its own because the mind has learned these patterns over time, through repetition, through experience, through unconscious reinforcement. And every time a thought is believed, every time a reaction is followed, every time awareness is absent, the pattern strengthens. This is why the same emotional cycles repeat. The same type of thoughts return. The same kind of suffering appears again and again, even when the external situations change. Because the source has not changed. The mind is still operating in the same way, still interpreting, still reacting, still creating, and as long as this process remains unseen, it continues without interruption. This is why many people feel trapped in their own lives, not because they are physically trapped, but because they are mentally caught in cycles they do not understand, reacting to patterns they cannot see, trying to solve problems at the surface level while the deeper mechanism continues untouched. And this is where a profound shift becomes possible, not by changing everything outside, not by controlling every situation, but by turning inward, not to fix the mind, not to fight it, but to understand it, to see how it moves, to see how it creates, to see how quickly it turns a simple moment into a complex experience. Because the moment you begin to see this process clearly, without judgment, without resistance, something begins to loosen. The automatic belief in every thought begins to weaken. The emotional charge behind each interpretation begins to soften. And for the first time, you start to experience a small gap, a space between what happens and what your mind says about what happens. And in that space, there is peace, not created, not forced, but revealed because it was always there, hidden beneath the constant activity of the mind. And as this awareness grows, slowly, gently, without pressure, you begin to realize something that changes everything. Suffering is not something that life is doing to you. It is something the mind is creating within you. And once this is seen, truly seen, not as an idea, but as a direct experience, the entire relationship you have with your thoughts begins to shift. You stop fighting them. You stop blindly following them. And instead, you begin to understand them. And in that understanding, their power begins to fade. You are not your thoughts. Up until this point, everything you have experienced, everything you have felt, everything you have believed about yourself has been filtered through one silent assumption, an assumption so deeply rooted that it has never been questioned. And that assumption is this: that the voice in your head is you, that the thoughts you hear, the reactions you feel, the inner dialogue that never seems to stop, is your true identity. Because of this, every thought carries weight, every judgment feels personal, every fear feels real, and every doubt feels like a reflection of who you are, not something separate, not something passing, but something that defines you. And this is where the deepest layer of illusion exists. Because if you look closely, if you slow down enough to observe without immediately reacting, something subtle begins to reveal itself, something that changes the entire structure of how you understand your mind, your identity, and your experience of life. Thoughts are appearing constantly, without your control, without your intention, without your permission. They come and go like clouds passing through the sky, forming shapes, dissolving, shifting, never staying, never stable. And yet, despite their temporary nature, you have been treating them as permanent, as meaningful, as something that must be followed, believed, and acted upon. But here is the question that most people never ask. If you were truly your thoughts, would you not be able to control them? Would you not be able to stop them at will? Would you not be able to choose only the thoughts you want? And yet, this is not your experience. Thoughts appear on their own, sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful, sometimes calm, sometimes chaotic, sometimes clear, sometimes confusing, and you do not choose which one comes next. This alone reveals something important. It reveals that thoughts are not you. They are something you are aware of. And anything you are aware of cannot be what you are, because awareness stands separate from what it observes. This is a subtle distinction, but it changes everything. There is a part of you that sees the thought. There is a part of you that notices the emotion. There is a part of you that can say, "I am thinking," which means there is something beyond the thought itself. That something is awareness, and awareness does not suffer. Awareness does not judge. Awareness simply sees. But for most of your life, you have not been resting in that awareness. You have been lost inside the content of the mind, inside the stories, the judgments, the endless commentary. And because of that, you have mistaken the movement of the mind for your identity. When a thought says, "I am not enough," you don't see it as a thought passing through your awareness. You feel it as a truth about who you are. When a thought says, "Something is wrong," you don't observe it. You react to it. Your body tightens, your emotions shift, and your entire state changes, all because of something that appeared for a moment and would have disappeared just as quickly if you had not held on to it. This is how identity is formed, not from reality, but from repeated thoughts that were believed without question. And over time, these thoughts create a narrative, a story about who you are, what you are capable of, how life works, how people see you, and this story becomes so familiar, so consistent, that it feels real, it feels stable, it feels like something solid. But it is not. It is a construction, a collection of thoughts repeated so many times that they created the illusion of identity. And once this identity forms, the mind begins to protect it. It resists anything that challenges it. It reacts to anything that threatens it. It holds on to patterns even when they cause suffering, because those patterns feel familiar, and familiarity feels safe. This is why change feels difficult, not because you are incapable of change, but because the mind is attached to the identity it has created, an identity built from thoughts. And this is where the deeper realization begins to unfold. If your identity has been built from thoughts, and those thoughts are not truly you, then who are you? This question cannot be answered by the mind, because the mind can only respond with more thoughts, more concepts, more ideas, all of which belong to the same system you are now beginning to see beyond. The answer is not something you think, it is something you experience. It is the quiet presence that remains when you stop following every thought. It is the stillness that exists when the mind slows down. It is the awareness that has been there all along, unchanged, untouched, observing everything without being affected by it. You have felt it before. In moments of deep calm, in moments where time seemed to slow down, in moments where there was no noise inside your head, only a quiet sense of being. That is closer to what you are than any thought you have ever believed. But because those moments are rare, because the mind quickly returns and fills the space again, you overlook them, you forget them, and you return to identifying with the noise. And this is how the cycle continues. Thought arises. You believe it. You react to it. It strengthens. It repeats. It becomes identity. But now, something is different. Now, you are beginning to see the process. Not as an idea, not as something you read or heard, but as something you can observe directly within yourself. You can see a thought appear. You can notice how quickly it tries to pull you in. You can feel the urge to believe it, to follow it, to become it. And in that moment, you have a choice, not to control the thought, not to fight it, but to see it, to recognize it as a movement of the mind, not a reflection of your identity. And in that recognition, something powerful happens. A gap forms, a space between you and the thought. And in that space, there is freedom, because now, the thought can exist without controlling you. It can pass without defining you. It can appear without becoming you. And the more you rest in that space, the more stable it becomes, the more natural it becomes, the more you begin to live not as the mind, but as the awareness behind it. This is not something you achieve. This is something you uncover, because it has always been there, hidden beneath years of identification, buried under layers of thought, but never truly lost. And as this realization deepens, slowly, gently, without force, you begin to experience life differently. Situations still happen, thoughts still arise, emotions still move. But something fundamental has shifted. You are no longer lost in it. You are no longer defined by it. You are no longer controlled by it. You are simply aware of it. And in that awareness, there is a kind of peace that does not depend on circumstances, a kind of stability that does not come from control, a kind of freedom that does not require anything to change, because it is not based on what the mind is doing. It is based on seeing clearly that you are not the mind at all, the power of observing. At this stage, something within you has already begun to change, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that the world can see, but in a quiet, internal shift that is more powerful than any external transformation, because for the first time, you are no longer completely lost inside your thoughts. You are beginning to notice them, to observe them, to see them as movements rather than truths. And this simple shift, this subtle awareness, carries within it a depth that most people never fully explore. Because observing the mind is not just about noticing thoughts, it is about changing your entire relationship with them. For most of your life, thoughts have not just passed through you, they have pulled you, shaped you, controlled your emotional state, influenced your decisions, and created the lens through which you experience everything. And because this has been happening automatically, continuously, without pause, it has felt normal, it has felt natural, it has felt like the only way to live. But now, you are beginning to step out of that automatic flow. You are beginning to see thoughts not as commands, but as events, not as truths, but as appearances. And in doing so, you are discovering something that cannot be understood through explanation alone, something that can only be seen directly through experience. You are discovering that you do not need to follow every thought. You do not need to react to every mental movement. You do not need to engage with everything that arises within your mind. Because thoughts, when left alone, have a natural tendency to pass. Just like clouds in the sky, they form, they move, and they dissolve. But only if you do not hold on to them. Only if you do not chase them. Only if you do not turn them into something more than they are. This is where most people become trapped. Because the moment a thought appears, they engage with it. They analyze it. They question it. They try to fix it. And in doing so, they give it energy. They give it attention. They give it importance. And that is what keeps it alive. A thought without attention is weak. A thought without belief fades quickly. A thought without engagement has no power. But a thought that is followed, repeated, and believed becomes strong, becomes persistent, becomes something that feels real. And so, the practice of observing is not about controlling the mind. It is about removing the fuel that keeps it active. It is about allowing thoughts to exist without interference. It is about seeing them clearly, without attaching meaning to them, without building stories around them, without turning them into something they were never meant to be. Imagine again that you are sitting beside a river. The water is flowing continuously, carrying leaves, branches, reflections of the sky. Some parts of the river are calm, some are fast, some are chaotic, but you are not in the river. You are sitting beside it, watching. This is the position of awareness. And when you are in this position, something remarkable happens. The river continues to flow, but it no longer pulls you with it. The thoughts continue to appear, but they no longer define you. The emotions continue to arise, but they no longer control you, because you are no longer inside the movement. You are aware of it, and this awareness creates a space, a distance, not a physical distance, but a psychological one, a gap between you and the mind, where reactions no longer happen automatically, where patterns no longer repeat unconsciously, where there is a moment of stillness before engagement. And in that moment, you are free. Free not because the mind has stopped. Free because you are no longer identified with it. This is the essence of inner mastery. Not domination of the mind, not suppression of thought, but non-identification. The ability to let thoughts come and go without becoming entangled in them. The ability to feel emotions without being consumed by them. The ability to experience life without the constant interference of mental noise. But this understanding, as simple as it may sound, requires something that most people are not used to. It requires patience. Because the mind has been active for years. It has been conditioned through repetition, through habit, through unconscious engagement. And it will not suddenly become still. It will continue. It will produce thoughts. It will try to pull you back in. It will create urgency. It will make certain thoughts feel important, necessary, impossible to ignore. And in those moments, the practice deepens, because observing is not something you do only when the mind is calm. It is something you do, especially when the mind is active. When a strong thought appears, when an emotional reaction rises, when the urge to engage feels almost automatic, that is where awareness becomes powerful, not by stopping the thought, but by seeing it clearly, by recognizing its nature, by allowing it to exist without immediately following it. And the more this is practiced, gently, consistently, without force, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually. The mind begins to lose its intensity. The thoughts begin to lose their grip. The patterns begin to weaken. And what remains becomes more noticeable. The silence, the stillness, the space between thoughts. At first, it may be brief, a few seconds of quiet, a moment of clarity, but even that is enough to reveal something profound. That peace is not something you create. It is something that is revealed when the noise settles. And the noise settles, not by force, not by resistance, but by lack of engagement. Because the mind feeds on attention. It grows stronger when followed. It weakens when observed. And over time, as this process continues, as awareness becomes more stable, more natural, more present, you begin to experience life from a different place. You are still thinking. You are still feeling. You are still responding. But there is less struggle, less resistance, less unnecessary suffering, because you are no longer adding layers to every experience. You are no longer turning simple moments into complex mental stories. You are no longer reacting to every passing thought as if it were important. You are simply allowing life to move. And in that allowing, there is a kind of ease that cannot be forced. A kind of clarity that does not come from thinking more, but from thinking less. A kind of presence that feels natural, effortless, grounded, and perhaps most importantly, a kind of freedom that is not dependent on anything outside of you, because it is rooted in awareness, not in control, not in outcome, but in the simple, quiet recognition that you are not the movement of the mind. You are the one who sees it. And the more you rest in that seeing, the more the mind returns to its proper place, not as your master, not as your identity, but as a tool, a process, a movement that no longer controls the way you experience your life. And in that shift, something deep within you begins to settle, not because the world has changed, but because your relationship with your own mind has changed. Detachment is freedom. At some point, as awareness deepens and your relationship with your thoughts begins to change, a new understanding starts to emerge, not as an idea you adopt, not as something you force yourself to believe, but as something you begin to feel directly through your own experience. And that understanding is this: that the source of your suffering has never truly been the thoughts themselves, nor the emotions, nor even the situations you face, but the attachment you have formed to them, the way you hold on to them, the way you identify with them, the way you resist letting them pass. Because attachment is subtle. It does not always look like clinging. Sometimes it looks like overthinking. Sometimes it looks like needing answers. Sometimes it looks like trying to understand everything, trying to fix everything, trying to make sure nothing goes wrong. And all of this feels justified. It feels responsible. It feels necessary. But beneath it, there is a quiet tension, a resistance to what is happening, a refusal to allow things to simply be as they are. The mind says, this should not be happening, or this should be different, or this needs to change. And in that moment, you move away from reality, not physically, but internally, and that distance, that gap between what is and what you think should be, is where suffering lives. Because reality itself, in its pure form, is not heavy. It is not complicated. It simply is. A moment arises, a situation unfolds, a feeling appears, and then, if left alone, it passes. But the mind does not leave it alone. It holds onto it. It repeats it. It builds stories around it. It turns a single moment into a prolonged experience. And that is attachment. Not the event itself, but the continuation of it through thought. You replay a conversation long after it has ended. You revisit a mistake long after it has passed. You imagine a future problem long before it arrives. And in doing so, you keep yourself trapped, not in reality, but in the mind's version of reality, which is always heavier, always more complex, always more demanding. This is why letting go feels so difficult, because you are not just letting go of a thought. You are letting go of a sense of control. You are letting go of the belief that by holding on to something, you can somehow manage it, fix it, understand it completely. But the truth is, control through attachment is an illusion. The more tightly you hold on to something, the more it controls you. The more you try to force clarity, the more confused you become. The more you resist what is, the more tension you create. Detachment, then, is not about pushing things away. It is not about becoming distant or emotionless. It is not about disconnecting from life. It is about releasing the need to hold on to every mental movement, every emotional reaction, every outcome that the mind tries to control. It is about allowing things to exist without turning them into something more than they are. When a thought arises, you see it, but you do not grab onto it. When an emotion appears, you feel it, but you do not build a story around it. When a situation unfolds, you respond if needed, but you do not carry it beyond the moment. This is true detachment, and it requires a level of trust that most people have never experienced. A trust not in the future, not in outcomes, but in the natural flow of life itself. Because life, when not interfered with by constant mental resistance, has a way of moving, of unfolding, of resolving itself in ways that the mind cannot predict. But the mind does not trust this. It wants certainty. It wants control. It wants guarantees. And when it does not get them, it creates anxiety. It creates tension. It creates suffering. But as awareness grows, as observation deepens, you begin to see that not everything needs to be controlled. Not everything needs to be understood. Not everything needs to be held onto. You begin to see that much of what the mind clings to is unnecessary, repetitive, and often disconnected from the reality of the present moment. And slowly, gently, without force, you begin to let go. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but moment by moment. A thought arises, and instead of following it, you allow it to pass. An emotion appears, and instead of resisting it, you allow it to move through you. A situation unfolds, and instead of overanalyzing it, you respond simply, without adding layers of interpretation. And in these small moments of non-attachment, something profound begins to happen. The mind starts to quiet down, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. The emotional intensity begins to soften, not because you suppressed it, but because you stopped reinforcing it. And the constant need to control begins to fade, not because you gave up, but because you realized it was never necessary. This is where freedom begins to feel real, not as an idea, not as a concept, but as a lived experience, a sense of lightness, a sense of space, a sense of being present without being burdened by constant mental noise. And in this state, something else becomes clear. That life, in its simplicity, is not the problem. The mind's resistance to life is. And when that resistance is no longer there, even partially, even for a moment, what remains is something that has always been available but rarely noticed. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything going your way. Not the kind of peace that depends on perfect circumstances. but a deeper, more stable peace that exists independently of what is happening. A peace that comes from not being entangled in every thought. A peace that comes from not resisting every emotion. A peace that comes from allowing life to unfold without constant interference. And the more you rest in this, the more natural it becomes. You begin to see situations more clearly. You respond more calmly. You recover more quickly from emotional reactions. You stop carrying unnecessary weight. You stop creating unnecessary problems, because you are no longer attached to every movement of the mind. You are no longer pulled in every direction. You are grounded, present, aware, and this awareness becomes your anchor, not something you hold on to, but something that is always there, unchanging, stable, quiet. And from this place, you begin to live differently, not because you are trying to be different, but because your relationship with your mind has fundamentally changed. You are no longer trying to control everything. You are no longer trying to fix every thought. You are no longer trying to avoid every discomfort. You are simply allowing, and in that allowing, there is strength. Not the kind of strength that resists, but the kind of strength that remains, unmoved, unaffected, free. And this is what most people spend their entire lives searching for, without realizing that it is not something to be found outside, not something to be achieved through effort, not something to be created through thinking. It is something that emerges naturally when attachment begins to dissolve, when the mind is no longer followed blindly, when awareness becomes the center of your experience. And as this deepens, as this understanding settles within you, something becomes undeniably clear. You do not need to escape your life to find peace. You do not need to change everything around you. You do not need to become someone else. You only need to see clearly what has been controlling you, and gently stop holding on to it. Awakening from the mind. At a certain point, after observing the mind again and again, after seeing thoughts arise and pass, after noticing how easily they try to pull you back into old patterns, something begins to shift in a way that is no longer subtle, no longer occasional, but deeply felt, almost undeniable. And that shift is not in your circumstances, not in your environment, not even in the thoughts themselves, but in the place from which you experience everything. Because for the first time, you are no longer fully inside the mind. You are no longer completely identified with every thought, every reaction, every emotional wave that passes through you. There is a distance now, a quiet space, a sense of separation that is not cold, not disconnected, but clear, stable, and aware. And in that space, something remarkable begins to unfold. You start to notice that life is happening in a way you never truly saw before. Moments appear, unfold, and disappear without needing to be controlled. Thoughts arise, move, and dissolve without needing to be followed. Emotions come, peak, and fade without needing to be resisted or held onto. And for the first time, you begin to experience what it means to simply be present, not as an idea, not as something you try to do, but as something that naturally happens when the constant interference of the mind begins to quiet down. This is what awakening begins to feel like. Not a sudden explosion, not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual, steady recognition of what has always been here, hidden beneath layers of thought, layers of identification, layers of unconscious patterns that once defined your entire experience of life. And as this recognition deepens, something else becomes clear. The mind never actually had the power you believed it had. It only had influence as long as you believed it, as long as you followed it, as long as you identified with it. But now, as awareness stabilizes, as observation becomes natural, as the space between you and your thoughts becomes more consistent, the mind begins to return to its true role, not as your master, not as your identity, but as a tool, a useful process when needed, a silent background when not, And this changes everything, because now you are no longer reacting automatically to every situation. You are no longer pulled into unnecessary emotional cycles. You are no longer trapped in endless loops of overthinking. Instead, there is a pause, a space, a moment of awareness before reaction. And in that moment, you are free to respond differently. Not from habit, not from conditioning, but from clarity. And this clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from seeing more, from being present enough to notice what is actually happening without immediately filtering it through layers of interpretation. You begin to see people more clearly, not through the lens of your expectations, your fears, your past experiences, but as they are in the moment. You begin to see situations more clearly, not as problems that need to be solved immediately, but as experiences that can be met with awareness. You begin to see yourself more clearly, not as a fixed identity, not as a collection of thoughts and beliefs, but as something much more fluid, much more open, much more spacious than you ever imagined. And in this clarity, something else naturally fades. The constant need to prove yourself, the constant need to control outcomes, the constant need to hold on to everything, because you begin to understand, not intellectually, but experientially, that nothing is permanent. Not thoughts, not emotions, not situation, not even the sense of self you once held so tightly. Everything moves, everything changes, everything passes. And when this is truly seen, deeply felt, not just understood, attachment begins to dissolve on its own. You no longer need to force yourself to let go. You no longer need to convince yourself to detach, because you see clearly that holding on is unnecessary. That clinging creates tension. That resistance creates suffering. And in seeing this, letting go becomes natural, effortless, not something you do, but something that happens. And as this continues, as awareness becomes more stable, more grounded, more present, you begin to experience a kind of peace that is not fragile, not dependent, not easily disturbed. A peace that remains even when thoughts arise, even when emotions move, even when life becomes uncertain, because this peace is not coming from the absence of activity. It is coming from the absence of identification. You are no longer lost in the movement. You are aware of it. And this awareness does not need to fight the mind. It does not need to control it. It simply sees it. And in seeing, everything softens. Everything slows down. Everything becomes lighter. You begin to move through life with less resistance, less tension, less unnecessary effort. Not because life has become easier, but because you are no longer creating additional struggle through constant mental interference. Challenges still arise. Difficult moments still happen. Pain still exists. But it does not stay. It does not multiply. It does not turn into prolonged suffering, because it is not being held onto. It is not being repeated endlessly through thought. It is allowed to pass. And in that allowing, there is freedom. Freedom not from life, but within it. Freedom not from experience, but from unnecessary suffering. Freedom not from the mind, but from being controlled by it. And perhaps the most profound realization of all begins to settle within you, that everything you have been searching for was never outside. It was never in other people. It was never in achieving more, becoming more, controlling more. It was always here, in the space between thoughts, in the stillness beneath the noise, in the awareness that has been present through every moment of your life, quietly observing, never disturbed, never changed. And now, for the first time, you are resting in it. Not perfectly, not constantly, but enough to know that it is real, enough to know that it is accessible, enough to know that it is not something you have to chase, only something you have to recognize. And this recognition, once it begins, does not disappear. It may fade. It may become less noticeable at times. The mind may become active again. Old patterns may return. But something has changed. You have seen. And once you see clearly, even once, the illusion can never fully take hold again. Because now, even in the middle of thought, even in moments of reaction, there is a part of you that knows, a quiet awareness in the background, a subtle reminder that what you are experiencing is a movement, not a fixed reality. And that knowing creates space. And that space creates freedom. And that freedom, even in small moments, even in brief glimpses, begins to reshape your entire experience of life. You begin to trust less in the noise of the mind and more in the stillness of awareness. You begin to rely less on constant thinking and more on simple presence. You begin to live less from fear, from control, from attachment, and more from clarity, from openness, from acceptance. And this is what awakening truly is. Not becoming something new, but seeing through what you are not. Not gaining something, but losing the illusion. Not escaping the mind, but understanding it so clearly that it no longer controls you. And in that understanding, life becomes simpler, lighter, more direct, more real. You are no longer living inside a constant stream of thought. You are living in the present moment, aware, grounded, free. And from this place, everything changes. Not because the world is different, but because you are no longer lost within it. Now, if you listen carefully, you can still hear it. That voice, that constant stream of thoughts, it hasn't disappeared. It's still there, just like it always was. But something is different now. You are no longer lost inside it. You are aware of it. And that changes everything. Because the moment you stop believing every thought is the moment you stop suffering from every thought. The moment you stop chasing every feeling is the moment you begin to feel peace. The moment you stop trying to control everything is the moment life begins to feel lighter. Nothing outside has changed. The world is still the same. People are still the same. Life is still moving in its own way. But your relationship with it has shifted. You are no longer reacting to everything automatically. You are no longer carrying every thought like it's truth. You are no longer trapped in every emotion that arises. There is space now. There is awareness now. There is stillness beneath it all. And in that stillness, you begin to experience something that cannot be explained, only felt. A quiet kind of freedom. A calm that does not depend on circumstances. A presence that does not need validation. A peace that does not come from control, but from letting go. And maybe for the first time, you realize something simple yet powerful. You were never your thoughts. You were never the noise. You were never the constant movement inside your mind. You were always the one who sees it, the one who hears it, the one who remains, even when everything else changes. So the next time your mind begins to pull you into fear, into doubt, into overthinking, pause. Don't fight it. Don't follow it. Just see it. Let it pass. And return to this moment, because this moment is where life is. This moment is where peace is. And this moment is where you are free.